Good evening and welcome to a Monday night edition of Generation Movie. My name is J.W. Caldwell, or as you can see by the thing, they call me Mr. J.W. No, just I'm
no
kidding.
One does.
Nobody does. It's always J.W. I get no Mr. involved. Joining me as always on our journey down the film hole. Let's say film hole. That sounds weird. The journey looking at films is Film Buff Online's own Rich Dries. Rich, how the hell are you tonight?
I'm doing great, man. Went to New York City yesterday. The Film Society at Lincoln Center is starting like last Friday through this coming Sunday, like a 9-day retrospective of the works of Todd Browning, who is one of the creators of the horror genre back in the silent days and the early talkies. Most people probably best know him as the director of Dracula. But he also did Freaks, which is a great film. And if you're a Ramones fan, you probably know that song. You probably know Freaks. He also did one of my favorite silents, The Unknown, which is really messed up. And so they were premiering a 4K 2K or 4K restoration of that film with some additional material that had just been recently discovered added back in. So that was nice to see. There's a lot of great films that they're going to have in that retro. So if you happen to live, in that New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, it's not too much of a drive.
In the tri-state area, really.
Yeah.
Browning's a really interesting director, and not a lot of people, remember him or hear about him. Everybody got kind of romanticized with James Whale. So Browning is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the horror genre. But in reality, he was ahead of his time on a lot of things.
And what was great about this yesterday was, this was like a 5:00 screening of The Unknown with Lon Chaney and Joan Crawford. And parents brought their kids. And to hear kids kind of excited about what they saw coming out, because it's a weird story. I'm not going to spoil any of it for you outside of saying the film starts off with Lon Chaney as an armless knife thrower. He uses his feet in a circus who falls in love with the circus owner's daughter. And I don't even want to.
I just want to say, can we just clear up that nothing happens good with circus folk? Like, there's never like a good there's never a good circus in the movies. There's never something where it's like, oh, it's happy time living at the circus.
Todd Browning, I think, if memory serves, was a carny and worked in a circus for a while before he got to Hollywood. So that tracks with that, and you again see him exploring that world in Freaks. But man, watching those kids come out of that movie afterwards, a couple of parents, a couple sets of parents with kids walked by me as I was, leaving the theater and everything. And it was fun to hear the kids just like animated, like, oh my gosh, that was great. Or that was weird, Dad. What the heck?
Why are we here? Why is this child abuse? Well,
but not in a negative way. They really, they
were excited,
really, enjoyed it. Yeah. So,
well, and I think the interesting thing is you look at the careers of other directors, and like Browning is somebody that Guillermo del Toro is really talked about in hindsight as somebody who really shades his work, right? So, like when you say something about a knife thrower in a circus, I'm immediately taking to Nightmare Alley, which came out about 2 years ago, where everybody, you know what I mean? Like, no good things come to circus folk. But Browning, it's a great idea to have a retrospective. It's a good thing we're having retrospectives again, although, hopefully the world doesn't end on Tuesday. Anyway, Ken McKernan, good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Good to have you.
Good evening, Ken. Thank
Joe
you for
Ridgely,
joining us.
Good evening, gentlemen. I remember watching the Heat Night TV series, but hadn't seen the movie until last night. Good stuff. Yeah, Joe is interesting. He's one of the big people behind the Indie Escape Network, which we are happy to be a part of, where we get to kind of ply our wares as film historians / critics / avant-garde pop culture nerds. And you can subscribe to everything.
Thank you very much.
What was that?
I prefer gadfly. Thank you very much.
Fine, gadflies. I guess. But if you like the content, we have our YouTube channel where you can get all of our shows, all of the episodes of Generation Movie. Also, all of the other shows that are on the network. We have a lot of great guests and hosts. We have Wendy Zero on Thursday nights now with the sticky microphone. We have Gabe and His World on Tuesday nights. So many great shows. And, of course, the end of the night on Sunday nights before us. On Mondays, getting your week off to the right start. So many great shows. The end of the night with Dave Madison and Joe and Scott Chiaffo. We also have the Facebook page and the Indie Escape Facebook page. By all means, jump in and be part of it. Have a good time. Get into it. And we're going to start tonight with something that's a little bit unsettling for comic book movie fans, right? I mean, that's the best way to describe it. I am, of course, Rich, talking about a major movie coming out last week, not doing very well at the box office, and nobody really having any kind of a clue what to do about it. So Shazam! Fury of the Gods opens with a $30 million opening weekend. It is a $120 million movie. The $30 million is almost $25 million less than the opening of the original Shazam. And my question to you is, first off, it's getting decent reviews, but not great reviews. Certainly not as great as the first one. The cinema score where people coming out of it are going, it's not as good as the first one, and that's fine, but this is a significant drop. And my question to you is, do you think it has something to do with people just going, I'm not going to invest in this universe anymore because we know Gunn and his crew are taking over, and I'm just not going to, because it poses a real big problem in December for Warner Brothers with Aquaman coming out, and Aquaman is substantially more budget heavy than Shazam, right? So What do you think?
Well, Shazam was, I think the cost was on Fury of the Gods right around the same as the cost on the original Shazam. So that puts it about $100 million, which compared to some of the other stuff that's been like very expensive, and I'm not just talking, like Marvel movies, this size would have cost $200 million. I don't know where Marvel throws that money, but on one side,
that's a good
Warner
question.
Brothers have been able to kind of keep those costs under control. Birds of Prey, $80 to $100 million film there. I'm guessing Blue Beetle coming up soon is going to be well under $100 million. But to get to your question, though, unfortunately, yes, I think some people are like, why should we watch this movie? Because it's not going to pay off for 3, 4, 5 things down the road, which, frankly, is a stupid fucking way to look at movies, honestly.
And especially this franchise, right? Because this franchise, when DC was huffing and puffing and blowing out all these movies that were loud and dark, and this franchise was the breath of fresh air. This is the one that came in and surprised the hell out of everybody that they loved it so much, and it had people chit-chatting about it after the fact. It became like a movie that hit with audiences at home during the pandemic, and all of these things where it just kind of ratcheted up. The idea that this filmmaker is going to, basically he has all his work kind of like shuffled a little bit because of what's going on with the studio. And again, it's this weird kind of like the studio doesn't know what the hell it's doing. We don't know what the hell we're doing. So the audience doesn't know what the hell we're doing. And while Gunn takes control of this, there are 3 movies coming out that have ties to the Snyderverse, which, by the way, doesn't get any help. You don't get any help from Zack Snyder, who's sending out fake tweets that are from Darkseid, and tweets about like he's just being such a bitch about everything.
True. He loves to jerk his fans around, and they seem to love it. And I don't want to kind of extend that metaphor any further than we need to.
It's pretty good metaphor.
But as to what Snyder has been tweeting about, I think it's going to be like a 3-day. We're going to show these films in an IMAX theater in Los Angeles, and then so the faithful can flock there and see it, which is fine. Shazam, outside of a cameo at the end of the film that they kind of blew in the marketing,
which is a shot in the foot.
It pretty much can exist outside of the collective DC cinematic universe that we've gotten so far, because I don't consider all of this Snyderverse. It started that way, and then thankfully people took some things and went in different directions and explore things.
It's a weird place. It's a weird place to be, but I think it's attached to whatever. Like, I know it's not. I don't consider it Snyderverse either, because again, it was far more hopeful, far more fun, far more in a kind of a hopeful, kind of optimistic direction. And
far better connected to the various, far better
comic books. Yes,
of the book characters.
Yeah. So
yeah, I would definitely say that.
It's just weird though that that it's kind of like, are we going to end up punishing? And the funny thing about it, these are directors that work with Warner Brothers. Because James Wan is going to be batting for Aquaman. Everybody's talking that the Aquaman test scores are kind of tanking a little bit. Also, the big talk is the Flash. Everybody assumes there's going to be a hard reset at the Flash. And all the things that came out this week about Tom Cruise seeing the Flash and then calling the director of the Flash and saying, "Hey, we might be able to work with you at somewhere down the line," is really intriguing and interesting. But again, it gets back to the point, like, before Gunn gets to take all this creative division and move things around, all the pieces on the board, picking a Batman, picking a Superman, he's still got these little messy things that they have to deal with. And it's funny, like, for the folks that made Batgirl, you have to ask a question. Like, a movie opens at $30 million, costs $110 to make. You have to be a little bit angry, right? Because, like, why are you doing?
Because honestly, you got
what's the difference?
You got Keaton in your movie as Batman, especially after he gets kind of like reintroduced in the Flash. Supposedly, that's what's happening. Yeah, I think it's going to do bank, especially if Flash is as good as
people are
everybody seems to say it is, and that does bank as well. I think the decision to shelve the incomplete Batgirl is looking stupider and stupider. But
not only that, they have Fraser too. They have an Oscar winner. They have an Oscar winner. They have Fraser. They have Keaton. They have two young directors that are a team, much like the directors that won for Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a weird place. We got some questions or comments. Let's see. Ken says, tweets like Gunn is the new Superman. Yeah, well, Gunn, I don't think Gunn is going to be the new Superman, but he is directing the new Superman.
Yes.
Superman Legacy is what it's being called. Let's see. Shazam 2 is fun popcorn flick. They could have better villains. I wanted the Worm. Too many super characters in the family, in my opinion. Mom and Dad were kind of clueless too. Sure, I think the Worm would have been nice because it was such a cool thing to do.
Mr. Mind, come on, let's give the weird little critter a
and also it's such a great tag.
And honestly, I would have loved to have seen Mr. Mind as well, because Mr. Mind just opens the door to a whole nother level of weirdness with the Monster Society of Evil, and you got Crocodile Man, you've got this giant robot who kind of looks like Adolf Hitler. You've got all sorts of things. And
little Hitler-ish. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I think one of the things they got away, for me, one of the things they got away from Shazam is when you make, like, end of the world type things where you're putting everybody in jeopardy and everybody. Shazam wasn't necessarily, first Shazam wasn't, it was more of a personal kind of like, I didn't get picked. I always loved the character interactions where, I didn't get picked for Shazam. Why would you pick this kid? I always loved the iteration, and I thought Mark Strong did a really good job in the first movie. We also have And yes, I am unbanned from Twitter. Congratulations, Ken. So much unbanning going on. Blue Beetle is going to have the Cobra Kai fan base behind it. Yes, that kid deserves the fan base. And everything I'm seeing from Blue Beetle, everything that they've done with Blue Beetle, the character up until this point, like in comics, and for the most part in the animated TV series, he's a big part of Young Justice, and he's a big part of several of the Justice League cartoons. All signs point to yes for Blue Beetle, but Blue Beetle comes out in the middle of the summer. Blue Beetle comes out where this March, box office wise, is playing out like to what we're going to see competition wise come the summer of 2023. March has been one big chugging movie after another, and with no end in sight. Because I mean, we started the month with Creed 3, box office clout. It's still holding solid through the weeks. And then Scream opened, and Scream, that franchise is chugging along like it's got nobody's business. And I think they've actually, like, if you've seen it or you haven't, all I'm going to say is I'm a big fan of the Core 4. And I think they've actually, the biggest thing they've done with that franchise is they've made me not care about, I still care about Gale and Dewey and Sydney, but the new Core 4 cast is pretty amazing. And they've actually done a really good job making me care about them more, which is something I didn't think would be coming from this franchise. But, and then, this week we had Shazam. It kind of didn't do as well as we thought it was. It doesn't get any easier for things next week. Friday, John Wick opens. And I got to tell you, I mean, it's going to do well, even though it's got a 3-hour running time, 2 hours and 49 minutes, Rich.
Yeah, it's insane, but apparently I have not seen any word where that's a detriment to the film.
No, all I've heard is it's like the best 3 hours of an action fan's life. Is everything I've read. And then the following week you have Dungeons and Dragons, which the critics.
I'm so psyched for that.
I was showing you beforehand. Look, I went to Target, Rich. I went to Target. This is how in vogue Dungeons and Dragons has become. I went to Target and I got something for my nephews. And this, of course, is the original animated cast from the animated series that premiered in the 80s that may be somewhere else soon. But
to get to your point about, people not investing in these movies because they've been trained by Marvel that everything keeps building and building towards something else. And that is an unfortunate side effect of the MCU. I hate to say it. As much as I enjoy a lot of the MCU, that, we just have, in some sectors lost the ability to enjoy a movie just for itself. And I think possibly we are seeing that here with Shazam. And
well, the MCU even ties to like you're saying though. MCU even ties to like horror films. When people were going to see Scream, everybody was talking about bringing back past characters, moving things all over the place, doing all kinds of weird stuff. And I was sitting there going, just be happy with what we got. We got a good slasher flick it's an hour and 45 minutes and it's pretty well done. And you know what I mean? Like, be happy. I want Stu to show up. It's like, relax. I don't know that we're going to get any more old characters. Be happy. Be happy we have a ghost presence. You know what I mean? Be happy we might get Sydney in the next movie or something.
And I think, though, that DC is going to hopefully, or Warner Brothers is going to address that kind of elephant in the room. Granted, we're not getting Superman Legacy till June, July of 2025. So a year and a half, or a little over 2 years. Excuse me. Math is bad tonight. But
that's okay.
But I think as we get closer to Aquaman in December, we're going to find out more about what those plans are and will, certain characters carry over or not. I don't expect to get the entire thing all laid out for us, because then what would be the point of making the movies? But I think they're going to do something to kind of address something so people know that go see Aquaman. And
you might get a taste.
It's a good movie, or
right. Well, and
don't worry, Jason Momoa is hanging around. So this might actually, this will.
I think it's just your
ongoing story.
You're right, though. Everything tying together has been the MCU's biggest plus.
Strength.
Right, and now it's kind of like even as we go see Marvel movies right now, one of the things that happened coming out of Quantumania was maybe not being as excited for Quantumania as we should have been, because all we wanted to do was get Kang facing the Avengers with when we had him right there. You know what I mean? It's weird. Okay, last comments, and then we will get where we go. Let's see. Oh, 2 actually. I would like to see Teen Titans come out of animation and go real life. I think everybody would. I think they have Teen Titan, the show on HBO Max. It's not bad. It's actually gotten much better. From the first season where they're trying to like curse and do all kinds of stupid shit, and they've rapidly improved. We just got to read for the Kids Library based off the D&D movie. Yes, that is what we're. Because one of the things that I can tell you about D&D from my perspective on D&D is it is a great place to learn math. It is a great place to learn literary tropes and characters. It's a great place to role play. It's great. I think, as we get into this D&D movie, we're about to go on and embark on an entirely new journey. And speaking of journeys, we are, of course, in the middle of our decade cavalcade, is what we're calling it.
I'll allow this segue.
That was a good segue. I thought it was good.
I like it. That's what I'm saying. I'll allow it. Go.
And that's, we've already covered the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Tonight we get one of the more rambunctious periods in American history. We get the raging 60s, and Rich and I had, there are so many great movies to pick from in the 60s. You could even go to the very end of the 60s. You could pick Midnight Cowboy. You could pick all these great 60s movies. But the one we came upon, and the one that I think has resonance and flow, especially in the world we're living in today, and it still does, is In the Heat of the Night. And it's this great movie by Norman Jewison. The Walter Murch Company produces it. It's Sidney Poitier, Rod Steiger. It's set in the South, Sparta, Mississippi, to be exact. And it's just one of those movies where a lot of things are happening on screen that are corresponding to the things that are happening off screen. And I think so we picked it, and we're going to stick with it because we think it's one of the more important movies of its kind and of the generation and of the decade. So Rich, what is importance when we're talking about In the Heat of the Night?
I think it's interesting that this movie, when this movie came out, we were not too far away from a South where Black characters were routinely just totally clipped right out of movies by local censor boards in the Deep South. If you had like say for example the Marx Brothers A Day at the Races, where there's a whole musical number, and then there's some black musicians, so it becomes a little jazz thing, and then there's some swing dancing, and then they go on to something else. That section with the jazz musicians and the swing dancing with the black dancers just
cut right out.
Away. Yep. In the South, you never saw that kind of stuff. Whole movies like Cabin in the Sky never played in portions of the South in their initial releases. So for a movie, we're not, with the release of this, we're not too far away from that era.
We're not super far away from fire hoses and dogs as well. Like,
I think we're still kind of there. But this movie slaps the South right in the face with their own racism, which honestly, at the time, it needed.
Well, yeah, and part of I'm not sorry. Don't be sorry about it. It's like sorry about like indie smacking Nazis. Oh wait, I forgot. Everybody likes Nazis now. It's like shut up. Anyway, ridiculous. Crystal says, "Hey guys, hi Crystal. Thanks for joining us."
Hi Crystal. Good evening.
She actually I think has a show coming up on the Indie Escape Network as well. So welcome. You know, she's a working actress. She was in Harlow's Haunt. So we thank you for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate you. I think the biggest thing coming out of this movie and watching this movie and looking at the time frame is this is the first African American actor that basically is invited into homes, is invited into cinemas nationwide, is invited not just in the big cities. So when they go to make this movie, when you look at it, basically Poitier is, working with Southern authorities, trying to get things right. Basically, they filmed in the South. They were under the Mason-Dixon line, so they had problems. And so they basically had to work with Tennessee authorities. They had to work with, all these different places. And that is the most interesting thing about production. The production is rife with Norman Jewison, a Jewish American man, directing Sidney Poitier, an African American man, and Rod Steiger, one of the great actors of his generation, in a real South where you actually have to deal with the characters that are in the film to film. So you hear stories about, basically all of the idea of an African American man wearing a tie on screen, the African American man wearing clothing that represents a white philosophy.
Well, there's
and you just
there's even a line that addresses that in the movie. Hey, why are you dressing like a white boy?
Well, it's a person that's in prison with him at the time,
or whatever it was.
And then basically, all the different things that are put out in the film are basically, it's one of basically the color, even the way they filmed Rich is important because the color proportion of Sidney Poitier versus the rest of the characters on screen. It's the first time that Haskell Wexler, a very prominent cinematographer, basically recognized that using the strong lighting produced too much glare on dark complexions and made them all look the same. And he felt it was a crime, so he fixed it so that Sidney Poitier stood out even more. And so it's all these little things where you're looking at screenings and you're looking at how they're watching, how this film is being produced. It's an amazing collective, building of trust, right? I mean, it's this incredible thing where you're looking up and you realize that they've made something so important, but they're also dealing with the racism that is in the film while they're filming, which is incredible. Joe Ridgely writes, I cringed when they kept calling Sidney Poitier boy. Yeah. The N-word gets thrown around quite a lot. So if anybody is watching and they you get a little bit, you just react a little bit to it. It gets thrown around once or twice. And then it gets thrown around towards the end by an angry mob of people where you're just you're actually worried for Sidney Poitier. And then Joe writes 163 a week. Yeah, it was a decent chunk of change. I think one of the more but I think that's an interesting point. But what I want to say is finding the right actors to play these two on screen, and Poitier already being a major star already, and this movie coming in and him solidifying that is one of the things that comes out of this production, right?
Well, first of all, unfortunately, that's just the way the language was at the time. This film is, in a way, it's a historic document of what that culture was like. And I'm glad that we can look back at it, and I'm more glad that we look at that as we look back at that, we go, ew, that's ugly, because that just means we've progressed. We've gotten better as human beings. Well, most of us.
Some of us.
There's still a few we need to drag along.
Into the 22nd century.
Is, it's but it's interesting. And honestly, if you were to set a story in the Deep South similar to this and made it today, I think some people would object to this kind of language, even though it would be historically accurate. And that's kind of a tough thing as a writer, now, I've directed a short film. Now I've produced a few. I would want to go for that realism, especially because it might make some people uncomfortable, because nobody good does that. And if you're saying, well, I feel uncomfortable because of that, I was like, good, you should, because those people are terrible. As to the comment about Mr. Tibbs making $163, I just pulled up an inflation calculator. $163 per week in 1963 is roughly equal to $1,600 a week right now.
That's about right. I think it's
almost 10 times.
I think it's about right. And I think the interesting thing when you're looking at one of the things that they do include in the production is that makes it give it an authentic feel to it. Is the film score, composed, arranged, conducted Quincy Jones. They released a soundtrack album on United Artists label in '67. Title songs performed by Ray Charles. And if you don't, as you're watching the title sequence and the title song being performed, if you don't get chills listening to it, it's not a song you hear all the time, but once you hear it in the movie and then you hear, Ray Charles kind of belting it out, it is, it's an incredible thing. And Quincy Jones designs the music and the score and the soundtrack and everything as like a Southern blues kind of atmosphere. It creates an atmosphere where you could be like in a hot night in the South. And I think it's interesting that the blues are a big portion of how African Americans have dealt with the oppression that they've lived under, and it's just a way for art. And I think it's a great place where it kind of infuses the movie from the get-go with an incredible, an eye towards what the racism in the South, being, kind of something that you can actually see in the air. You know what I mean? And I just think it's a great choice when you have a genius like Quincy Jones that you bring in, and he infuses that right in the score of the film as they're producing
it. Yeah. Now, it's funny that I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry, my brain just farted.
That's us. That's us in a nutshell. That's perfect.
I was gonna say usually we're better at this.
Well, my brain just but I think part of it is that when you watch a movie like this, it's a not only is it a testament to the importance of films and what films do, but it's also a testament as a time capsule to the time you're watching from, right? So 66 when this movie comes out, it goes on to dominate the Oscars in 67. And when we get there later on in the film, the movies it dominates in this particular Oscars is astounding. But it also is a time capsule of the movie, the years and times where they're living. And so at this point, Poitier has established himself. He's been on screen, Raising the Sun. He's been on screen in The Defiant Ones. He is the top of his game, and he is more than an equal for Rod Steiger. And I think part of the interest there is you have these two kind of heavyweights going at it, and they both have distinctly, and one of the reasons Jewison picked them was because of their distinctly different acting styles, right? Poitier is kind of classically trained. He enunciates. He does all of these things that are very specific. Steiger playing like the Sparta, Mississippi chief of police is kind of like a good old boy Southern, but we know Rod Steiger wasn't. But he definitely, one of the things that he does in the movie, which I watch production, you can't tell me any people who film a film want you chomping gum the way he's chomping gum in this movie. And all I could think of was like movies recently for me where you watch Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt is always eating on screen. And one of the things that Brad Pitt talks about is when you're eating or chewing or doing whatever, it's harder to actually focus on being your character. So it becomes this, when I was watching Rod Steiger, like he's flapping the gum and the gum flapping gets more intense as the scenes get more intense. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's a great little indicator of like his character's mental state almost. Because the more he's chewing, the more he's actually thinking. And we get the idea that maybe he's not so used to doing that. Now,
yeah, well,
it's an incredible performance from Steiger. And I always love to compare and contrast it to he played the New York police commissioner in I think it was the police commissioner in 1989's The January Man with Kevin Kline and Alan Rickman and Elizabeth Mastrantonio. And he is ridiculously over the top. Like the angriest you see him shouting in this movie is his quietest moment in The January Man. He's like off the scales, bananas, like rage ball screaming. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely, if you want to see Rod's, just
the opposite side of Rod Steiger.
You want to see him just bananas, a human explosion every time he's on the screen. Go track down The January Man. And it's also a really fun mystery with, like I said, Kevin Kline. I love that movie. I saw it 3 times in college in 1 week at the theater.
So comment from Tim. Quincy Jones also scored In Cold Blood, which was released a few months later, and Scott Wilson was in this film and in Cold Blood. Yeah, I mean, it is a great connection, Tim. And Scott Wilson is really good as one of the lower ranking criminals in this movie. He's very good in it, actually. Ken writes, the movie let the world see racism in America at the time period. It was eye-opening for some. Yeah, and the thing is, it's still eye-opening. When you're watching it, you're like, this is how people react. And like the opening sequence, like you think nothing of somebody getting off a train and sitting in a depot waiting for the next train to come until you're an African-American in 1960s Sparta, Mississippi, right? And you like even everything about him, like there's nothing about him in that scene where you go, why is this cop taking him in? He's got Samsonite luggage. You know what I mean? He's dressed to the nines. Like, but it's incredible. And then
the fact that the cop doesn't even interrogate him. He just like grabs him and goes, well, okay, you're a black guy. You must be guilty of something.
Let me see all 10 fingers. Spread them out. Yeah. I want to see all 10. It's like, what's he going to do with one finger? It's ridiculous.
I had 2 fingers for that cop, but
yeah, they're both middle of my hands. But like I said, it's one of those movies where you are watching it, and then when you look at all the stuff behind the scenes, it's one of the things that kind of is in play, and one of the things that the director and Silliphant, who did the adaptation for the book to movie, I think it's interesting that there's almost a Messiah approach to the Tibbs character, right? And the production kind of sets in on that because he goes around, he travels all these different places. He's trying to fix things as he's going along. He's trying to help people, trying to do the right thing. And it's an interesting thing that they were looking to do that also in the screenplay, were places where he would impact, like, say, there's a moment where he's at the Phillips station, and it's also like a garage run by an African-American, and the 2 kids are out front, and he's like, I'll stay at a hotel, and the guy just laughs at him, and the kids laugh at him a little bit, knowing full well that there's no hotel in town that would take him. And so it becomes this, it's an incredible thing. But the production is just the beginning of it, right? So production happens. They open the movie. We get, and this is where things start to get stunning for it, right? It opens, and I believe, let's see, it opens in 66. It grosses at the time $24.3 million, which, to put it in perspective, and again, as we do with all movies, we do all. So this is the first movie one of the first movies we talked about recently during the Oscar decade cavalcade, that's over $20 million, right? Most of the movies we've talked about, 30, 40, 50s, struggling to get above 10, but this movie grosses $25 million. Rich, it's 12 times its budget. The budget on the movie is only $2 million. It's gangbusters. It plays well in it. It not only plays well in the South, but it plays well in all of the urban areas of the country, because at that point, Sidney Poitier has not only become a box office icon, but he's guaranteed money at the box office. He's become the kind of person that can open movies, right? And it basically, they opened it in New York. It opened August 2nd, 1967. It grossed $108 million, $108,000, excuse me, in its first 5 days. And that was at the Capitol Theater at 86th Street, in New York. It then opens in Miami, Florida, and Toronto on Friday, August 4th. 2 days later, it grosses $20,000 for the weekend there. And so, it just lasts and lasts. And by the time we end up in, like, later on, it gets released. It was released after race riots in major cities as a way to kind of cool down expectations. Also, making sure films get kind of like noticed and brought out. Mm-hmm. And it becomes one of the biggest box office hits of all time for United Artists at the time. Because it's just, it encompasses, it does well everywhere. Now, I don't necessarily think it does well everywhere because of Sidney Poitier, because he's not, for film fans, he's everything, right? He's been in all these movies. He's endearing in everything he's in. He is the one actor that you look at with regards to race relations in this country. He's the one actor that actually crossed the aisle. He was the one actor that could not only star with Rod Steiger in this, but he could star with Tony Curtis in The Defiant Ones, or he could star with Spencer Tracy in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And so he is an uber star at this point. And the box office proceeds are from this. Now, don't get me wrong, Rod Steiger is not what I would consider a box office draw. For the rest of the country, the draw is two opposites, right? Two opposite cops working together to solve a murder, which I don't know, might become some sort of genre in itself, which we'll talk about soon. But yeah, it becomes this like a box office sensation, and it plays. It doesn't necessarily open. It doesn't open like we open movies today on, thousands of screens. It plays. It does. It's a moving road show. So it goes from town to town, city to city. Your theater had to wait to get it. It played, many cities at the same time, but not a lot of cities at the same time. And it's an incredible testament to not only the material, but the box office draw that Sidney Poitier was and remained throughout his career. He was making movies and making box office well into the 80s and 90s. Later, of course, as he progresses, he gets into supporting roles, but still he was selling points for the movies.
Oh, definitely. And just the roadshow aspect of the release of this just goes to the point of how incredibly different distribution is today as opposed to how it was just 50 years ago.
And the other side note is, when you look at it, $24 million. Also, I do want to point out this is another movie where we have international distribution. It did not happen that often, and we talked about that last week but it did have an international box office of $27,000. So it got across the pond in some way, where it played in other countries, which is not necessarily, which is totally different from today, where American films are one of our chief exports in the United States. American films are one of our chief exports. I can't stress it enough, how much of an export we actually have with the film industry. So quick question from Tim. That slapping scene in the greenhouse was intense. And when the man told Tibbs that at another time he could have had him shot. The slap scene is amazing.
That I think is the
so
distillation of that entire film is that moment.
Yeah, it's well, yes, because it's two guys questioning somebody they believe is a suspect, who in any other time in his life has never been questioned as a suspect by anyone. It also involves that scene also ties in with other scenes in the movie. So you have, Sidney Poitier is looking at the butler, right? And Rod Steiger, the guy slaps him. He slaps him back, and it's one of the coolest slaps you will ever see in a film, more justified than anything, but also lightning fast. It is so fast. It's a blink and you miss it. Like I rewound it when I rewatched the movie because it's a backhand. It's the guy does like a smack like a child, and Sidney Poitier hauls off and backhands him, and it's incredible. But it ties into other parts of the movie. Like there's a scene where later on in the film where the mayor of the town calls Rod Steiger into question, like, why are you treating this guy any differently? Are you going soft on this guy? Because our last sheriff would have shot him and just said it was self-defense. So this particular scene ties into a lot of things.
Yeah, I think you hit upon an interesting idea there too. You said, he slaps Poitier, like one would slap a child. And that's basically that guy's attitude towards black people, that they need to be guided. They need to be nurtured. They need this, that, the other, because
they need to be fed.
He viewed himself as superior. And when Poitier, backhands him, basically, he's treating him as a man, as an equal in that act of violence. It's very interesting whether it's a palm or the back of the hand, how much that reinforces character at that moment.
All of the rage in that scene happen. It starts building early, and when Tim says it's intense, that ain't a joke. It starts building early in the scene because they're walking around a greenhouse, and Poitier knows a thing or two about the genus species that the man is raising. He also knows that he's looking for something specific as an evidence or clue. And Poitier at one point thinks that he might be on even ground with Endicott because he says something, and he's like he points out a particular orchid that Sidney Poitier likes, and that the Tibbs character likes, and Endicott says, "Oh yeah, of course you would pick this one. This is the one that requires the most nurturing, needs to be fed and grown and taken care of, much like the Negro." And it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And up at that point, like Poitier's face, the blood drains out of his face, and he just realizes that this nice small talk conversation was just like a dog and pony show where he's trying to impress a person that will never ever be impressed. And then the slap comes, and then the smack comes, and you're enthralled by it. And also just like there's a dangling pinky where he smacks him and his hand is just kind of outstretched and the pinky's kind of hanging there like it hit the guy's face. And you're just like, it's so awesome. But so speaking of awesome, let's talk about the critical plaudits for this movie. It is one of those movies, like, first off, when we go and look at things and we're studying things about way we can, kind of extrapolate out the critical response then and now, how we do it, and also how everything is kind of boiled down to Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic sites that we've become accustomed to. Rich is at 95% from critics. So it's upper tier for movies we've done on our show. And It's at 92% for audience score. So if an audience sees this movie, there's no way you cannot come out of it falling in love with either the performances, the characters, the story, the setting, the direction, the cinematography, the score, everything about this movie. You come out of it going, this is height of entertainment. This is, it's an intriguing potboiler of a movie, but it's also got so much going on in it that you sit back and you go, this is what movies can do. Movies can entertain, because you can certainly watch it as just an entertaining thriller, right? Guy gets murdered in the street. They got to find out who did it. But the subtext, the world building, the character building between two actors, two leads, two major stars at the time, the direction, all make it into an important film of the time. Right?
Yeah, and I think another point we should probably bring up, we probably should have brought it up before actually, was this movie is coming out just a couple of years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where it said basically, and I'm quoting here, that they're prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So the fact that, we're living in we're living for 2 hours in a town where they never heard that this passed, apparently, or they heard and they just don't give a shit, is very much indicative of the idea of, like, the Civil Rights Act didn't cure this country of racism. It was, it's part of an ongoing process to dismantle those modes of thinking and to.
It's more of a treatment. It's more of an ongoing physical therapy bath that we have to take. And the other side of it that's really super cool, when you read about the production side of it and you read about everything, the cinematography is striking. It is, you can see the fog on the camera, how hot it is in Sparta, Mississippi, when this movie's taking place, right? That's one of the great things about it. The performances are top notch. Portier is so dignified in almost every movie he's in. He's got this air about him where he is a star. Like, and the thing is, we have many actors we watch today, and we have many people we look at movies and we get excited about people that are in our movies. But he's a legitimate movie star, Rich. He is, to a certain degree, somebody that other people, people of, African-American descent, had never seen anybody on screen acting the way he acted or acting with the people he was acting with. He is, but every time he gets those things, he runs with them. He nails the performances. They're out of the park. You can always count. If you watch a Sidney Poitier movie, if you go and you stream a movie or you watch a movie on cable or anything, and Sidney Poitier is in it, you can guarantee yourself a good 2 hours. There will be a good story. There will be there'll be good acting, and every once in a while it'll blow your mind at how good he is. And I think, you pair him with Rod Steiger, who's kind of like, in this movie he's down and dirty. He's chewing on scenery. He's having a blast. He has the most arc of any of the characters in the film. The potboiler sense of the movie, I think if to be honest, as critics, as you and I are talking about it, if you're telling somebody that you're going to go into it and there's a whodunit to it, it's not the part of the movie you come for. It's certainly an effective thriller watching Portier work through the town from high to low, figuring out who is going on. But it's not necessarily anything where you, like, when they get to the ending and they reveal who it is, and it's not something you're going to be like, oh, that's Knives Out-ish. Or, it's not going to be that. But I will say it's engrossing. Yeah, it dominates.
The mystery is not the engine driving this plot. Yeah, it's more of an excuse to have Poitier's character go through town and encounter several different varieties of horrible people, but it also gives
that is a wonderful way. Several varieties of just terrible human trash. That is a great way to put it.
But it also gives us a couple of characters who, especially Rod Steiger, who ultimately grow to respect him. I think some of the other cops in the station house at least begrudgingly, respect him because of what he was able to do ultimately in catching the crook. Whether it generates moments of self-reflection within these guys and,
you don't know.
Personal growth, probably not.
I think
Rod Steiger's character might have a little smidgen of growth, and compared to everybody else we've seen in this town, that's at least encouraging.
Yeah, it's encouraging for the little kids that we see early on that live in this town that maybe, he won't pull his gun first, and kill. I think the other thing that I do definitely want to talk about critique wise, and one of the things that has to be brought up, there is a sequence in the movie towards the end where, and it's really this tragic sequence that actually I think encompasses police work and being civil servants and being in the military or whatever. And it doesn't come up. It doesn't come up a lot when we look at our movie heroes or we look at action films or thrillers like this. There is a sequence where Rod Steiger and Sidney Poitier are in a house and they're just talking amongst themselves as two men who don't have wives, who don't have kids, who barely have family, who just have their jobs, just have their work. And it's this really touching moment where two men are, and it doesn't happen often, Rich, where we have two guys that are on screen, major stars, talking about how goddamn lonely they are. And I think one of the most interesting things about rewatching this movie is that moment is so poignant where Rod Steiger's like, haven't you, how, what's your life like? And he's like yours. We're similar. Like,
yeah,
you're lonely and sad some nights. I'm lonely and sad some nights. And the thing is, it's not just about two guys finally recognizing they're on the same team and they're on the same level. I think this is something where when we're watching movies now, one of the things that's going on in this country right now and is allowing for all this weird shit to kind of jump in and out is we have a lot of lonely guys. We have a lot of lonely men who don't have friends, who don't have anybody they can talk to. So, we have suicide rates going off the charts. We have all these things. But if you find one friend or you find somebody that you can talk to about just about anything, movies on a Monday night or, screenings they get to go to. And you and I have been like, when you go to your screenings, I send you a message, you send them back. I'm just like, I don't want to know any details. I just like, how was it? And you're like, it wasn't bad. Or you'll message me. But the idea that two men, maybe we need friendship. Maybe we need talking and being able to go, hey, you know what? I'm a little sad. Like, and our parents before us put their heads down and buried their heads and kind of worked through everything. And it just doesn't work with the amount of information and the amount of things we're going through as a society. I think it's one of the most touching moments I've seen in any of the movies we've done on this show. It doesn't get enough credit. And I also think it's one of those things that really ties it in with what's going on now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a beautiful scene.
That's an interesting observation. Obviously when they made the film, they couldn't, see into the future.
But it was there. But that shit was always there for guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You work, you go home.
I mean, honestly, I think the point of the scene is, I think maybe it's a little surfacey, but yeah, it's them finding that connection and that friendship. And honestly, and especially for Rod Steiger's character, to look beyond for even just a moment, the color of, his, of this other person's skin, and seeing
just as sad as you are.
Yeah, we're all the same. And this is, we've seen people do this all the time in movies. And this is a much better approach to that kind of scene where two people, are trying to make a connection. This is probably a much better way to do it than say, oh, I don't know, go, oh, your mom's name is Martha, so's mine.
Well, yes, because we love banging on Snyder, but anyway, but yeah, I think it's like I'm extrapolating it out to where we are now. I'm just, it's a really touching moment in the middle of the thriller that happens, and I just wanted to give it credit because it's one of those things where I was like watching it, and I'm like, it's a scene that gets ignored a little bit, from the slap or the Mr. Tibbs line. Or all these different things. There are other moments in the movie where things occur where you're just like, it's a really poignant moment that I was really moved by.
The slap and the Mr. Tibbs line are iconic. They're
yes,
powerful moments in and of themselves. They're loud, powerful moments. This is a quiet, powerful moment. And that's why the slap or they call me Mr. Tibbs line will get dropped into any number of Oscar montages every year. You will see one or both of them.
Yes,
but you will never see, the line,
the quiet line with Rod Steiger. Yeah, as a fantastic point. Quick point from Tim. Thank you, Tim, for tuning in as always. Decades later, Mississippi Burning was another great film that was a sure reminder of our past. Yes, and again, it's about two opposites that kind of go into the deep end of Mississippi, which is, kind of where it is. I do want to point out that almost all of the reviews were positive. I mean, we're at 95%. Although Roger Ebert was great in pointing out something that I just pointed out that I didn't want to bring in until I had said it first, but I didn't read this. I read a couple of reviews like Pauline Kael's and everything, but he basically says the story itself is a little type-hat, but Steiger's performance is amazing. It gets great reviews. It does very well. And one of the things that comes up is that it becomes certain filmmakers' favorite movies, and Akira Kurosawa is one of them, who is a great filmmaker that loved this movie. And then let's talk about legacy and franchise viability. Oh, good.
Before we do that, I do want to say one thing that doesn't get brought up as much as I think. Virgil Tibbs is not a perfect character. They could have very easily made him like just morally upright and always doing the right thing in the face of this horrific racism. But he does some things he does out of pride. Some things, he does out of, I would almost say, a little bit of anger when he, and he even admits that, he made the mistake of going after Endicott
for personal reasons.
He was mad. Yeah, for personal reasons. And I think that added layer of complexity makes this a much more interesting film than if it had just kind of been a little bit more polemic in the way of him being, the virtuous character, virtuous character, and he did nothing wrong the whole time.
I'll one up with you. It becomes even more important to the story and more important to the character and who he is. He has I think the sequence occurs at like the place where they're building the factory, and he's playing with the wood, and he's trying to figure everything out. And basically, Gillespie comes to him, the Rod Steiger character, and says, "Hey, you're gonna get murdered in this town if you keep on going the way you're going." And he's like, "I haven't found the killer yet." And he's like, "Well, we think it's Endicott." "Yeah, but I was going after Endicott because I made a mistake, because it was personal, and I because I just hated him, right?" And he's like, "I made a mistake." It's even more profound that he admits this mistake to Gillespie and the Steiger character.
Oh yeah,
because the entire movie he's portrayed as, the word I want to use is uppity, right? Because it's profoundly racist the way they treat him, but it's also he's portrayed like everything he talks about is right for the most part. He's figuring things out left and right at a geometric rate as they're progressing. He gets the murder time right. He gets so much right. It is really a great shade that you throw on him for him to be able to admit to a character that he doesn't necessarily think respects him.
Mm-hmm.
I made a mistake. I did this, and you've been talking me up with everybody, and I just want you to know I didn't get it right, and I'm gonna get it right. I just need a couple more days. He keeps on saying that, even as it gets more dangerous and dangerous in the town. I think it's great that he keeps on saying, I just need a couple more days. Just give me a couple more days and we'll get it right. But I think it's really profound that he does admit he's not he's not Benoit Blanc. He's not. And that's the movie. Like, I think if you hear thriller, murder thriller, that's the movie I think people are thinking about right now. It is not like that. It is more, it gets wrapped up in a neat bow, but it's more about these two guys on this journey together. And that's where I think, and it's something I don't think comes up enough, right? For legacy of franchise viability, it first off, it had a huge franchise viability because it became a hit TV show in the 80s. It became a huge, 80 or 90s. It became a huge TV show, and basically it did so well on television. Sandra Day O'Connor, Carol O'Connor, of course plays. Yeah, Sandra Day O'Connor. my mind is in different places, but it becomes this huge TV show that becomes kind of a working out the racial tension every week on a weekly basis with these two characters, Virgil Tibbs and Steve Gillespie, and it becomes one of those shows where somebody definitely watched a lot of it because it had tons of seasons. And it's an incredible thing. It also develops into a bit of a franchise for Portier because he has two sequels out of it. They Call Me Mr. Tibbs and The Organization, which both did well at the box office, but didn't reach the level of critical acclaim.
Have you seen either of them?
You know what? I haven't, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going back. I think I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to go back because I noticed where I found this was on Tubi. It was free on Tubi. So Tubi has a ton of movies, but they have both They Call Me Mr. Tibbs and The Organization on Tubi. And up until when I started researching, I didn't know he had two sequels. I knew that They Call Me Mr. Tibbs is a sequel.
Yeah.
Where he basically he does a thing in San Francisco with a murder of a prostitute. And then but I had no idea there was a third one. So I think I'm going to go back because I enjoy the character and I enjoy Portier in everything he does. To Sir with Love, he's such a good actor.
I have not seen The Organization, but I have seen They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. And a couple things to note. It takes place only 2 years later, but in that time, or 3 years later, 1970, excuse me. But in that time, Virgil Tibbs has gotten married and moved out to San Francisco from Philadelphia. And man, the funky soundtrack on They Call Me Mr. Tibbs is an absolute delight. If you were to watch this movie just for the soundtrack, you're doing okay. I mean, it's a great movie.
You wouldn't be faulted.
But you couldn't be faulted for that. It's really good. Now, The Organization, I have not caught up with.
I think I'm going to though. I think
I was vaguely aware it existed, but I never was kind of like, well, no one's ever talked about it really, so maybe it's not great. But if you're saying that it did okay with the critics, then it might be worth tracking down at some point, and to revisit that. And I've never watched the TV series either.
I've seen the TV series here and there. I think my grandparents watched it. It was in '88. You know what I mean? Howard Rollins, who of course was in Ragtime and Soldier Story, and Carol O'Connor, who's of course Archie Bunker. So it's like a second. Yeah, every great television actor has at least two series in him. It lasted for almost 6 seasons. So it's definitely had a place. what I would also say, one thing that has to come up, Rich, if you're talking about legacy and franchise viability, the legacy of this movie is we are going to see over the next 3 or 4 decades, 5 decades, till we get to our show, 6 decades, you're going to see a lot of African American and white cops paired together to solve murders. You're going to see Riggs and Murtaugh. You're going to see, even if you go Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, you're going to see Rush Hour guys. You're going to see a lot of people coming together. And although in those movies, the racial differences and the differences between the characters is often played for laughs, or just differences, right? A little less poignant than here, but it is still something that becomes a legacy that you're going to pair people together, and they're going to find a mutual place to coexist together.
Yeah.
Tim Snyder writes 48 hours. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
48 hours, definitely.
Another film with uncomfortable racism.
I would argue more uncomfortable racism than this movie. Like 48 hours is uncomfortable racism for entirely different reasons.
That's true.
But very similar, but tied together.
Yeah. Now, of course, we picked this because this is one of the Best Picture winners of the 1960s, and the crop, the nominated titles, for here the 40th Academy Awards really kind of represent a pivoting point in Hollywood history and Hollywood approaches to film and the birth of like that new cinema movement. Because, we've got In the Heat of the Night, Bonnie and Clyde, Dr. Dolittle, The Graduate, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
So he's in 2 movies nominated in the same year. And I just want to point out, he doesn't get nominated himself. Sidney Poitier is nominated at all, which is ridiculous. Also, a quick note for folks realizing that it's 1967. Yes, we read the Best Picture nominees, and there was no Cool Hand Luke nominated for Best Picture. That's how competitive.
Newman did get the Best Actor nom there.
But what I'm saying is, how you're telling me in 1967 we couldn't lose Dr. Dolittle? Like,
we absolutely could.
I'm fine with all the other ones, but In Cold Blood also doesn't get nominated.
Yeah, but the thing that I'm trying to get to is that Dr. Dolittle and maybe even Guess Who's Coming to Dinner are very much more studio films. In the Heat of the Night is, United Artists. That's, halfway to being an indie production. The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde are also very non-traditional studio product. And
they changed the way films were made.
Where you start to see, the shift away from the old Hollywood way of doing things. Mark Harris, who's a writer for Entertainment Weekly, wrote a great book a few years back called Pictures at a Revolution. And it's entirely about this year and those 5 Oscar nominees and how they relate to each other and how they exemplify the differences in that were coming to Hollywood in terms of the kinds of movies that Hollywood was going to be making. And those, Hollywood was definitely by this year put onto a different kind of track, a different direction that only once we hit 1975 and Jaws and 1977 and Star Wars did that kind of change again. So it was only a short-lived period of about 10 years where we got this kind of really interesting
auteur. It's an auteur period.
Yeah, that kind of dealt with
very indie
and everything like that. And then Star Wars came along and blew that all up again.
Well, and Jaws and Star Wars are the two that completely, basically said we can not only make money, but we can make really good movies. Another thing that comes up, like, so when we're talking about the Academy Awards, and again, I was amazed. The idea to me, as we're looking through these years and everything, the idea that Cool Hand Luke isn't even nominated for Best Picture, or that In Cold Blood isn't nominated for Best Picture, makes these wins all the more impressive. It wins in several categories. It's nominated for 3. It's nominated for 7. It wins 5 of 7.
Mm-hmm.
It wins Best Picture. It loses Best Director. It wins Best Actor. It wins Best Screenplay, Best Editing. Who, by the way, the editor on the film is Hal Ashby, which is he will become a legacy of this film is a little bit. Hal Ashby will become a pretty good action director for the 70s, and then it wins Best Sound and it loses Best Sound Effects. So basically, it wins 5 of 7. The person that wins is Rod Steiger for Best Actor, but this is one of a handful of movies where you talk about 2 leads, where maybe the lead that's the best thing in the movie, because Steiger's great, he chomps scenery, he does everything. I have a view that the more understated actors in these acting pairs, the more understated actor should be the one that we're focusing on. I'll give an example, just so everybody understands what I'm talking about. So here you have Steiger and you have Portier. Portier, basically playing stoic, civil, dignified, right? And it's a harder performance because almost everything he has to react to is people, when they use the N-word or they call him boy, or he has a rage that's building behind the eyes that is just beautiful to watch. Steiger gets to chomp scenery. He gets to have the big character arc where he becomes a better person, realizes that the person he's been working with is an equal. I view it in the same way as a movie like Philadelphia and a movie like Rain Man. Philadelphia, Tom Hanks wins the Oscar, and he's opposite Denzel Washington. Denzel is the character that has the arc, is the more basically dignified performance. Hanks gets makeup and all these other things, but we don't even get to talk that much about Denzel because he doesn't get nominated. The same goes for Rain Man, right? Mm-hmm. Dustin Hoffman gets nominated and wins with this performance it's an astounding performance about an autistic person and the way that Raymond's mind works. But the performance in Rain Man that's the winning performance for me is Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise is the one that has the bigger arc, that basically figures everything out, and having to play off this guy that's basically eating the scenery around him. Yeah. So I think this is one of a handful of performances where the legacy is when you have these 2 stacked performances, somebody is going to win an Oscar, right? But it's not necessarily going to be the one you look at later and go, that's a better performance. And I just think it's a real interesting little Oscar twinge, a little kitsch for you, for folks that are watching. But
and what I find funny too is after all the talk we've had about the slap, to lose the sound effects Oscar.
How?
Come on.
It's not just that. Come on now. It's not.
The power of that moment is that actual sound.
That actual sound effect. But the legacy of this movie is incredible, though. And actually, I think one of the things that comes out of this movie also is the idea. First off, it's definitely part of the 100 movies. It's also you actually have it has been on so many of the American Film Institute's recognition lists that are all super easy to watch and super easy to find, and they've changed some things up. But it gets movie quotes, which is They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. It gets In the Heat of the Night song. It's in the AFI top 10 for nominated mystery film. It is all over that, and it is one of the most incredible American movies that was filmed, and it's not played for the past. It's playing in actual time when it comes out in the 60s. It's just amazing.
Yes.
And with that,
and as a note on those AFI lists, if you go to the American Film Institute's website, they have like their AFI's 100 best comedies, 100 best cheer moments, 100 best villains and heroes, 100 best American film. Just print all of those out and then check off all the ones you've seen, and then go back and start watching all the ones you haven't. Because Every single thing on there is amazing, and it's probably the best way to give yourself a.
It's the best compilation. It's a really, and another thing you can do is you can read some of the books by some of the directors. Scorsese has an amazing amount, vast knowledge of films, his 10 best, and where you can watch. You know, when you talk about a movie like this, where Kurosawa talked about this movie in public, about how important this movie was. If you find a director talking about a movie, by all means go and watch that movie, because usually the directors are the ones that pick up on what somebody's laying down. And with this, we leave the 60s, Rich. We leave the 60s behind. We get into the magic auteur 70s and the magic of what will happen when you pair a perfect actor with a perfect part and a perfect actress with a perfect villain part, and you create movie magic. In next week's offering, the 1970s pick for us is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes.
So we get Jack Nicholson. We get oh my God, I'm going up on her name. Jesus.
So am I.
Louise Fletcher. It's Louise Fletcher as Nurse Ratched, one of the greatest movie villains in the history of movies. One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest, which, by the way, if you're playing at home and you need places to find these things, always good to check where to watch. But also, I will tell you that I've done some research, and I will say the 70s movie and the 80s movie is currently sitting on HBO Max for anybody that's interested. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tease the 70s movie and 80s movie just in case things might leave at the end of March because of the Oscars. So the 70s movie we're doing is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a fantastic movie. The 80s are an incredibly mixed bag, but there's a movie that we talked about, Rich and I, and we picked that is just chock full of Oscar-nominated performances. And it is one of the most touching movies ever made. It's a movie that I personally love with regards to crying, and is also currently available on HBO Max as we speak. Our 80s movie will be Terms of Endearment. So
that's a blind spot for me too. So I'm excited to kind of take the time to dig into that.
I got to tell you, it is one of my favorite movies. And if you look at the poster here, Rich, you will see that Deborah Winger is credited over Shirley MacLaine. And one of the things we're going to talk about in production of that movie in 2 weeks is how much Shirley MacLaine and Deborah Winger didn't like each other. And a lot of it comes spilling out into the screen. But next week, Jack Nicholson in one of his most documented performances. It is also, we're going to talk about something. It might have been something we've already done on the show. It may have been one of those movies that won a bunch of very important Academy Awards. I don't know. Just might be.
And directed by Milos Forman, who is a fantastic director.
It's a great movie. Comments to end the night, and then Rich, where can people find you?
Okay. Well, let's see what Ken has to say.
I was hoping you would have done Serpico. Ken, it was there. There were like the 70s movies are so hard. We were also talking, and legit, but it was also, we wanted to focus on movies that might not get as much attention. With all the stuff that's been going on about, we did discuss doing The Godfather or The Godfather Part 2. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and even a movie like Serpico, and remember, we might get back to this, Ken. There might be Oscar Decade Cavalcade 2. So don't worry, Serpico was definitely involved in the running, but we wanted to give a movie from the 70s that doesn't necessarily get talked about quite as much. Tim writes, Brad Dourif Billy just had his birthday. Yes.
Yeah.
Brad Dourif, there are many people in this One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, including a very younger Danny DeVito, a younger Brad Dourif, Christopher Lloyd, and a very young Jack Nicholson. At the height of whatever game you think Jack Nicholson has, this is one of those charismatic, dominating performances, and he finds his match in Louise Fletcher. Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to it. Where can people find your stuff? Film Buff Online's been very busy this week, Rich.
Yes. Film Buff Online is where I house all of my writing, as well as a couple of our contributors. Most recently, my good friend Bill Gadavaskis contributed a piece, and he's got another one on the way that I'm anxious to.
The piece is fantastic. It's about the in memoriam segment. It's really good.
Yes.
Piece.
There you can also find a link to the other podcast that I do on the regular. It's called the Big Picture Podcast. I do that with my best friend, Natasha Bogutsky, and we haven't done one since for about 2 weeks, but we're trying to figure out our next recording schedule and what we're going to talk about. So once that drops, of course, I'll let everybody know here. And you can find me on the Twitter at FilmBuffRich.
So you can find me. I do a show called Loud Nerdy. That'll be airing tomorrow night. Might have 2 guests tomorrow night. I don't know. We're going to work on something called The Four. And this is an interesting topic that's going to come up. And it's basically where you try to look at somebody's filmography, either a director, an actor, or actress, and you pick 4 movies in a row that are absolutely perfect. I think I know what I'm going to go with. 4 movies in a row that are like home runs, or not home runs, but at least something where you look at it and you go, that actor was on a streak, an amazing streak. So it should be fun. I do Loud Nerdy. We have Loud Nerdy the group. We have Loud Nerdy the page, also on Facebook. You can find me, JW the Movie Guy, on Twitter, Instagram, and the Facebook as well. And you can find me every Monday night here on the Indie Escape Network, except for nights we take off, doing this great show called Generation Movie with Rich Trees. And we want to thank everybody for watching tonight. Thank you so much for paying attention and joining us on this journey through film history. We think we got some exciting stuff coming up for you in May and June. We're looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. And we're, of course, looking forward to finishing up the Oscar Decade Cavalcade. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great week. We'll see everybody. Have fun at John Wick, people. Stay out of trouble. Don't go shooting up any discos with ninjas in it or anything. By the way, can't take JW pics on our video on Twitter. I'll try to figure that out. I'll figure that out, Joe. I'll figure it out. But thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great week. We'll see everybody next week for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.